The creek was rising fast, brown water clawing at the banks like something alive. Abigail Turner stood waist-deep in the current, her hands bloody from rope burn, watching her husband fight to save livestock that weren't worth his life. She could have stayed on the porch, could have let him drown proving something to nobody, but she'd come too far, crossed too many miles, burned too many bridges, to lose this now. So she waded in. This is the story of a woman who became a substitute, a survivor, and finally, herself. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The decision came on a Tuesday, which Abigail would later think was fitting. Tuesdays had always been laundry days, mending days, days when nothing important ever happened. Her mother delivered the news between stirring a pot of beans and checking the cornbread in the oven, as if she were discussing the weather. Caroline won't be going to Wyoming. Abigail's hand stilled on the butter churn. Through the kitchen window, she could see her younger sister in the yard, pale and pretty in her blue dress, one hand pressed to her forehead like a wilting flower. Caroline had perfected that pose over the past 3 days. Her constitution can't handle it, her mother continued, not looking up. The travel alone would destroy her health. Dr. Brennan confirmed it this morning. Abigail resumed churning. The wooden handle was smooth under her palms, worn down by years of her grip, not Caroline's. I see. Someone needs to go. Her mother's voice carried that particular flatness that meant the discussion was already over. The man's already paid the travel expenses, given us the first installment. We can't return it. Your father's already used it to settle the store account. The beans bubbled. Abigail watched her mother's back, the rigid line of her shoulders under faded calico. They'd had this conversation before, though never quite so explicitly. Every time Caroline couldn't finish the milking because her hands cramped. Every time Abigail took on extra washing because her sister's back hurt. Every time something difficult needed doing, and Caroline somehow couldn't, and Abigail somehow could. You're suggesting I go instead. I'm saying what needs to happen. Her mother finally turned, wooden spoon dripping bean liquid onto the floor. Her face held no malice, which somehow made it worse. Just practicality. Mathematics. You're stronger. You can handle frontier life. Caroline would wither out there. And I won't. You're like your grandmother. She came from Kentucky to Nebraska with nothing but a cast iron skillet and a bad attitude. Outlived 2 husbands and a drought. Her mother's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You've got her jaw. Her hands. Might as well have her fate, too. Abigail set down the churn. Her hands were indeed like her grandmother's had been. Broad, capable, scarred in places from hot stoves and sharp tools. Not refined like Caroline's, which stayed soft despite Abigail doing most of her share of work. What does Caroline say about this? She's heartbroken, naturally, but she understands the necessity. Her mother returned to the beans. The man's name is Nathaniel Walker, rancher, 36 years old, no family left. His letter seemed adequate. Abigail almost laughed. She'd read that letter too, secreted away in Caroline's room where her sister kept it pressed between the pages of a romance novel. Straightforward to the point of bluntness. Mr. Walker needed a wife to help run his ranch. He could provide a home, security, respectability. He wasn't promising romance or luxury, just honest work and fair treatment. Caroline had wept over it, calling it the most unromantic proposal imaginable. Abigail had thought it refreshingly honest. He's expecting Caroline. Then you'll explain the situation when you arrive. Her mother's tone suggested this was a minor detail. Men like that want a capable wife, not a beautiful ornament. He'll understand the practicality. There it was. The assumption that Abigail was practical, not beautiful. True enough, though hearing it stated so plainly still stung in a distant way, like a bruise you'd forgotten until you pressed on it. And if I refuse? Her mother's hand stilled on the spoon. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire crackling and Caroline's affected sighs drifting through the window. Then your father's debt stands. We lose the farm by autumn, and all of us suffer. She met Abigail's eyes directly. You're 24, Abigail. You've had no serious suitors. This might be the only offer you get. The cruelty was entirely factual, which made it impossible to argue against. Abigail was 24. She had received no proposals, despite being reasonably intelligent and undeniably hardworking. Men in their county wanted wives who could smile prettily and manage a household with grace, not women who could birth a calf or fix a plow blade. She'd made herself too useful, too unfeminine. She'd let herself become the spinster daughter, the one who stayed home to help, while Caroline got the attention and the opportunities. Until now, apparently. Now Caroline's delicacy had finally found its limit. "I have one condition," Abigail heard herself say. Her mother raised an eyebrow. "I tell him the truth. I write to him before I leave, explain the substitution, give him the option to refuse." Abigail's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I won't go out there under false pretenses. If he accepts me knowing I'm not Caroline, fine. If not, we find another solution." "There is no other solution." "Then he'll accept, won't he?" Abigail untied her apron. "But I'm doing this honestly or not at all. I won't start a marriage with a lie." Her mother studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite respect, but maybe recognition. "You are like your grandmother, stubborn as a mule with a burr under its saddle." "She lasted through worse than this, didn't she?" "She did." Her mother turned back to the stove. "Write your letter then. Your father will post it tomorrow. The stage leaves in 10 days, regardless." Abigail walked out of the kitchen and nearly collided with Caroline in the hallway. Her sister had clearly been listening, her blue eyes wide and wet. "Abby, I'm so sorry." "Don't." Abigail sidestepped her. "You're getting exactly what you wanted. Just have the decency not to apologize for it." "But I didn't want—" "You never want, Caroline. You just can't. Can't handle the travel, can't manage the work, can't face the uncertainty. It's very convenient." Abigail kept her voice low, conversational even. Anger would give her sister ammunition. "But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I'm tired of being the solution to everyone else's problems while having none of my own." She climbed the stairs to the small room she shared with her sister, leaving Caroline in the hallway making soft crying sounds that their mother would soothe later. The room held one narrow bed, one wider one, a shared dresser, and a trunk at the foot of each bed. Caroline's was painted white with roses. Abigail's was plain pine. Caroline's side of the room held ribbons, pressed flowers, the romance novels she treasured. Abigail's held her grandmother's quilt and a collection of practical books, animal husbandry, medicinal herbs, basic carpentry. She pulled out paper and ink, sat at the small desk by the window, and began to write. "Mr. Walker, you have been corresponding with Caroline Turner regarding a marriage arrangement. I must inform you that Caroline will not be coming to Wyoming. Her health is too delicate for frontier life. I am writing to propose myself as an alternative. My name is Abigail Turner. I am Caroline's older sister, 24 years of age. I am strong, healthy, and accustomed to hard work. I can cook, clean, manage livestock, and handle most repairs around a property. I do not tire easily, and I do not complain. I am not beautiful like my sister. I am not refined or well-educated in the traditional sense. I do not play piano or paint watercolors. But I am honest, and I am capable. And if you need a partner to help run a ranch, I can do that work. If this arrangement is unacceptable, I understand completely. Please respond via telegram to spare us both the awkwardness of my arrival unwanted. If I do not hear from you before the stage departs on the 23rd, I will assume you are willing to at least meet me and make a final decision then. I will not deceive you. I will not pretend to be something I'm not. If you want a true partner, not a delicate flower to protect, I am offering myself. Respectfully, Abigail Turner." She read it over 3 times, waiting for doubt to creep in. It didn't. The letter was blunt to the point of gracelessness, but it was truthful. If Nathaniel Walker wanted someone like Caroline, he could refuse and find another bride. If he wanted what he'd actually described in his letters, someone to share the work of building a life, then maybe this could work. She sealed the envelope and left it on the kitchen table for her father to post in the morning. The next 10 days passed in a strange blur of normal and surreal. She continued her usual work, feeding chickens, hauling water, mending clothes, while simultaneously preparing to leave forever. Her mother went through Caroline's trousseau with grim efficiency, removing the more delicate items and replacing them with practical ones. The lace nightgowns went back in the drawer. Heavy flannel ones took their place. The silk shawl was swapped for wool, the impractical shoes for sturdy boots. Caroline watched this transformation with something between relief and guilt, but she didn't offer to switch back. Whatever ailment she'd developed, real or imagined, held firm. The telegram arrived on day 6. Abigail was in the barn when her father found her, mucking out stalls in the morning heat. "This came for you." He held out the yellow paper, his expression unreadable. Her hands were filthy. She wiped them on her skirt, already ruined, and took it. "Proposal accepted. Stop. Arrive as planned." Stop. "Honesty appreciated. Stop. N. Walker." 8 words. No flowery language, no false promises. Just acceptance and acknowledgement. Her father watched her read it, his weathered face showing more emotion than her mother's had. "You don't have to do this, Abby." She looked up at him, surprised. He so rarely contradicted her mother. "Yes, I do." She folded the telegram carefully. "Not because of the debt or the farm. Because I want to." "You want to marry a stranger and move 1,000 miles away?" "I want a chance at something that's mine." She returned to shoveling manure because stopping would make this conversation too significant, too final. "I've spent 24 years being useful here. Being the strong one, the capable one, the one who doesn't need things because Caroline needs them more. I want to go somewhere I'm not just the substitute for someone better." Her father was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You were never the substitute, Abby. Not to me." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She kept shoveling. "Then you should have said so before." He didn't have an answer to that. He left her in the barn, and she cried a little, hidden behind a horse where no one could see. Not from sadness exactly, but from the sudden weight of change. Everything was moving now, whether she was ready or not. The remaining days accelerated. She packed her trunk with practical things: work dresses, sturdy undergarments, her grandmother's quilt, the medical book she'd studied, seeds from the garden wrapped in paper, her mother's old cookbook with notes in the margins. She was bringing a life's worth of practicality and almost nothing sentimental, which seemed appropriate. The night before she left, Caroline came to their room while Abigail was doing a final check of her trunk. "I brought you something." Caroline held out a small package wrapped in cloth. Abigail unwrapped it to find a beautiful lace handkerchief, delicate and expensive, the kind of thing Caroline treasured. "I can't take this. You love this handkerchief." "That's why I'm giving it to you." Caroline sat on her bed, hands twisted in her lap. "I know you think I'm weak. Maybe I am. But I'm not stupid, Abby. I know what you've done for me my whole life. I know you've made yourself smaller so I could be bigger. I never—" "You did. You stopped drawing because Mother said we couldn't both have art lessons and mine were prettier. You turned down the teaching position because I was sick that month and someone needed to care for me. You've been carrying me for years, and I let you because it was easier than admitting I couldn't carry myself." Abigail sat down beside her, the handkerchief soft between her fingers. Caroline continued, her voice thick. "I'm not brave like you. I can't imagine getting on that stage and riding into something completely unknown. But you can. You always could." She finally looked up, tears streaming down her pretty face. "So take the handkerchief, and when you get there, when you're building this new life, have something that reminds you that someone back here knows how strong you are, even if I never said it before." They sat together in silence, shoulders touching, two sisters who'd never quite understood each other finding a moment of clarity too late to change anything. "I forgive you," Abigail said quietly, "for what it's worth." "Thank you." Caroline's voice was barely a whisper. "I hope he deserves you. I hope I deserve this chance." The stage left at dawn. The whole family came to see her off, which was more ceremony than she'd expected. Her mother gave her a bag of food for the journey and a brief, awkward embrace. Her father pressed money into her hand, his own savings, not the family's, and told her to write. Caroline hugged her tightly and made her promise to be happy. Then Abigail climbed into the rattling stagecoach, her trunk secured on top, her whole life reduced to what she could carry. The driver cracked the reins. The horses lurched forward. She looked back once to see her family standing in the dust, Caroline waving her handkerchief, growing smaller and smaller until the road curved and they disappeared. She was alone then, truly alone, for the first time in her life. The coach held 2 other passengers, a whiskey salesman who fell asleep immediately, and a thin woman in widow's weeds who stared out the window without speaking. The landscape rolled past, familiar Nebraska prairie giving way to something slightly less familiar, then completely unknown. Abigail pulled out the book she'd brought, a novel Caroline had given her years ago that she'd never read. She opened it to the first page and started reading, more to have something to do with her hands than from any real interest in the story. But by the third page, she was caught, and by the end of the first chapter, she'd forgotten to be nervous. The journey took 6 days. They changed coaches twice, stopped at way stations that ranged from adequately clean to actively hostile to human life, and ate food that Abigail wouldn't have fed to pigs back home. The whiskey salesman got off in Grand Island. The widow got off in North Platte. New passengers cycled through, a young couple heading to Colorado, a preacher with bad breath, a farmer who talked incessantly about soil quality. Abigail spoke little, observed much. She watched the land change from rolling prairie to something flatter, drier, harder. She saw her first antelope, her first actual tumbleweed. The sky grew bigger somehow, the horizons more distant. By the 4th day, she understood why Caroline's delicate constitution would have wilted here. This wasn't soft country. This was land that demanded strength just to exist in it. On the 6th day, the coach pulled into Cheyenne. The town was smaller than she'd expected, but busier. False-fronted buildings lined a wide dirt street. Cowboys on horseback wove between wagons. The air smelled like dust and horses, and something sharp she'd later learn was sage. The driver helped her down and hauled her trunk off the top. "Someone meeting you, miss?" "I believe so." She stood on the wooden sidewalk, trunk at her feet, scanning the faces of strangers. Her dress was wrinkled and dusty. Her hair had escaped its pins hours ago. She probably looked exactly like what she was, an exhausted woman who'd just traveled 6 days in a stagecoach and was beginning to question every decision that had led her here. Then she saw him. He stood apart from the crowd, leaning against a post, watching the coach with an expression she couldn't quite read. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes that had seen better days. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see a dark beard, sun-weathered skin, and eyes that looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. He pushed off the post and walked toward her with the easy gait of someone who spent most of his life on horseback. When he got close enough, he stopped and removed his hat. His hair was dark brown, streaked with gray at the temples. His eyes were gray too, or maybe green, hard to tell in the late afternoon light. "Miss Turner?" "Abigail Turner, yes." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Mr. Walker?" "Nathaniel Walker." He turned his hat in his hand, studying her openly, not leering, just assessing, like he was trying to reconcile what he'd expected with what stood in front of him. "You made it." "I did." An awkward silence stretched between them. He was handsome in a harsh way, not refined like the men in her mother's romance novels, but solid, real. There were scars on his hands and a bend in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once. He looked like a man who'd lived every one of his 36 years and hadn't spent them comfortably. "Your letter was unexpected," he finally said. "I imagine it was. I apologize for the short notice." "Don't." He met her eyes directly. "I appreciated the honesty. Most people wouldn't have bothered. Most people would have shown up and hoped you wouldn't notice the substitution." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Would have noticed." "I thought you might." She gestured at her trunk. "I brought what I could. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Walker. I know I'm not what you expected, but I can manage a household and I learn quickly. If you give me a chance, I'll prove my worth." Something shifted in his expression. He studied her again, longer this time, and she forced herself not to fidget under the scrutiny. "We should talk before we make any binding decisions." He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing, which it decidedly did not. "I've got a room at the hotel for you, separate from mine," he added quickly. "Thought we could have supper, discuss the arrangement properly. See if we suit before we make anything official." Relief and disappointment tangled in her chest. "That seems reasonable." "This way." He led her down the street to a 2-story building with hotel painted in fading letters across the front. Inside it was clean, if Spartan. He paid for a room, carried her trunk upstairs, and set it inside the doorway. "Take some time to wash up and rest. I'll meet you in the dining room at 6. That give you enough time?" "More than enough." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Miss Turner?" "Yes?" "Thank you for the letter. For the honesty. Not many people lead with their shortcomings like that." "I wasn't listing shortcomings, Mr. Walker. I was stating facts. There's a difference." That almost smile appeared again. I suppose there is. 6 o'clock then. He left, and Abigail sat down on the edge of the narrow bed, her legs suddenly weak. She'd made it. She was here. The man seemed decent enough, practical like his letters, not openly hostile to the substitution. This might actually work. She washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into her least wrinkled dress, and attempted to do something with her hair. The mirror above the dresser showed a woman who looked tired and plain and utterly out of place. Not delicate like Caroline, not pretty or refined, just sturdy. Capable. The replacement. She met Nathaniel in the dining room at exactly 6 o'clock. He'd cleaned up too, fresh shirt, hair combed, beard trimmed. He stood when she entered and held out her chair, which surprised her. Ranch work hadn't killed his manners then. They ordered beef and potatoes for both, and sat in awkward silence until the food arrived. Then Nathaniel set down his fork and looked at her directly. I'm going to be honest with you, Miss Turner, because you were honest with me. Her stomach tightened. Here it came. The polite rejection. I needed a wife for practical reasons. Someone to help run the ranch, manage the house, be a partner in building something. I wasn't looking for romance or a society marriage. I was looking for a capable woman who could handle hard work and isolation. I understand. Your sister's letters were pretty, flowery, full of talk about destiny and love at first sight and building a beautiful life together. He grimaced slightly. Made me nervous, honestly. I don't have time for beautiful. I need functional. Despite herself, Abigail smiled. Caroline has always preferred the romantic version of things over the practical one. Your letter was different, blunt, almost harsh, listing your qualifications like you were applying for a job as a ranch hand, not a wife. Was that wrong? No. He leaned back in his chair. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I read your letter and thought, finally, someone who understands what I actually need. He paused. But then I also thought, she's doing this out of obligation. She's sacrificing herself for her family. That's not fair to either of us. Abigail set down her own fork, meeting his gaze squarely. Mr. Walker, I won't lie and say I didn't come here partially because my family needed me to, but I also came because I wanted something different. I wanted a chance to be more than the dependable daughter who stays home and takes care of everyone else. I wanted to build something that was mine. Even if it means marrying a stranger, especially if it means marrying a stranger. At least then I'm choosing my own fate instead of having it chosen for me by default. He studied her for a long moment, his gray-green eyes sharp and assessing. Then he nodded slowly. I'm going to propose something, and you can refuse if it doesn't suit you. I'm listening. The ranch is 3 hours from here, remote. The house needs work. The land is hard. I'm gone from dawn to dark most days, sometimes longer. It's a lonely life, even with two people sharing it. He paused. I'm proposing a trial period, 1 month. You come out to the ranch, see what the life actually is. No commitments beyond that. At the end of the month, if you want to leave, I'll pay your passage back to Nebraska, no questions asked. If you want to stay, we'll make it official. Abigail considered this. It was more than fair. It was generous, actually, giving her an escape route if she needed it. And if you decide I'm not suitable, what happens then? Same thing. I'll pay your passage home, but I'll be honest about why, so you're not left guessing. What about... She hesitated, then pushed forward. What about propriety? People will talk if I'm living at your ranch unmarried. People are already talking. I'm a 36-year-old rancher who sent for a bride and got her sister instead. This town thrives on gossip. He shrugged. But if it matters, Mrs. Chen comes up from town twice a week to do laundry and heavy cleaning. She can chaperone after a fashion. It was practical, sensible. It gave them both an out if this didn't work. Abigail found herself nodding before she'd fully thought it through. 1 month. That seems fair. Then we'll head out in the morning. I've got supplies to pick up anyway, and the wagon's more comfortable than the stage for the last leg. They finished supper, making awkward small talk about the journey, the weather, the growth of Cheyenne. When the meal ended, Nathaniel walked her to the stairs. Miss Turner? She turned back. You can call me Abigail. If we're going to be living under the same roof for a month, Miss Turner seems excessive. Abigail, then. He tried the name out like testing the weight of it. I'm Nathaniel, Nate, if you prefer. Nathaniel suits you better. Does it? That almost smile appeared again. Get some rest. Morning comes early. She climbed the stairs to her room, her mind spinning. This was happening. She was actually doing this. In the morning, she'd ride out to a remote ranch with a man she'd just met and spend a month trying to prove she could build a life from scratch. Fear tangled with something else, something that felt almost like excitement. She was free of Nebraska, free of being the responsible daughter, free of living in Caroline's shadow. Whatever happened next was hers to shape. She slept better than she had in weeks. Morning came with pale light filtering through thin curtains and the sound of wagons already moving in the street below. Abigail dressed quickly, braided her hair with efficiency rather than care, and carried her trunk down to the lobby herself before Nathaniel could insist on doing it. He was already there, settling the bill with the clerk, and he raised an eyebrow when he saw her struggling with the heavy trunk on the stairs. Could have helped with that. I managed. She set it down with more force than necessary, slightly out of breath. I won't be helpless just because there's a man around. Wasn't suggesting you were helpless. Just that the trunk weighs near about 60 pounds and there's no prize for throwing your back out before you even see the ranch. He picked it up and headed for the door. But suit yourself. They loaded the wagon in silence that felt almost companionable. The supplies he'd mentioned took up most of the bed. Sacks of flour and cornmeal, crates of canned goods, lumber, fence wire, a new axe head, lamp oil, and various other items that spoke to the isolation of where they were headed. Her trunk fit in the remaining space, wedged between the flour and a coil of rope. The wagon seat was narrow. When Nathaniel climbed up beside her, their shoulders nearly touched. He didn't apologize for the proximity, just gathered the reins and clicked his tongue at the two draft horses hitched to the wagon. They rolled out of Cheyenne as the town was waking up fully. A few people stared. A man and woman leaving together always drew attention, but Nathaniel ignored them and Abigail followed his lead. The road headed west, then northwest, cutting across open country that made Nebraska look crowded by comparison. For the first hour, neither of them spoke much. Nathaniel seemed content with silence, his attention on the horses and the road. Abigail watched the landscape change, trying to memorize landmarks even though everything looked the same after a while. Rolling grassland, distant mountains that never seemed to get closer, the occasional creek cutting through the prairie. You'll want to learn the land, Nathaniel said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. Easy to get turned around out here if you don't pay attention. See that rock formation? He pointed to a cluster of red stones rising from the grass about a mile south. That's Devil's Thumb. Marks the boundary of my property on the south end. How much land do you have? 1,800 acres. Not all of it's usable. There's rough country to the north that's good for nothing but rattlesnakes and coyotes. But the creek runs through the middle, and the valley's got decent grazing. How many cattle? About 200 head right now. Should be closer to 3, but I lost a fair number last winter. His jaw tightened slightly. Hard winter. Lost more than cattle. She waited, but he didn't elaborate. After a moment, she asked, Is that why you sent for a wife? Because of what you lost? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, My brother and his wife lived with me. Helped run the place. They died last November. Pneumonia took them both within a week of each other. I'm sorry. Me too. He kept his eyes on the road. Place has been falling apart since. I can manage the livestock and the land, but the house, the chickens, the garden, all the things Sarah used to handle. I'm drowning in it. Tried to hire help, but no one wants to live that far from town for the wages I can afford. Marriage made more sense. It was the most he'd said at once since she'd met him, and the honesty of it struck her. He wasn't looking for romance or companionship. He was looking for a business partner who could cook. What was she like, your sister-in-law? Capable, tough, laughed loud and cursed louder. She and Thomas were good together, balanced each other out. He was steady, she was wild. They made it work. He adjusted his grip on the reins. You would have liked her. She had no patience for delicate women. Then it's good Caroline didn't come. That earned her a genuine smile, brief but real. Yeah, Sarah would have eaten her alive. The road, more of a track, really, wound through increasingly rough country. They forded 2 creeks, the wagon lurching over rocks hidden in the water. They passed another ranch, marked by a weathered gate and a house so distant it was just a smudge against the horizon. Nathaniel nodded toward it. That's the Henderson place, nearest neighbors, about 8 miles south. Ben Henderson and his sons run cattle. His wife Clara is the closest thing to a friend you're likely to find out here. She's not warm, but she's fair. How often do you see them? Not often, maybe once a month, if that. We help each other during branding and roundup, but otherwise everyone keeps to themselves. That's frontier hospitality. We'll show up if you're dying, but we won't drop by for tea. Abigail absorbed this. 8 miles to the nearest woman. A month between visits. The isolation she'd imagined suddenly felt more concrete, more real. In Nebraska, she'd been surrounded by people, family, neighbors, the constant presence of others. Here, there would be nothing but land and sky, and whatever she could build with her own hands. Having second thoughts? Nathaniel's voice held no judgment, just curiosity. No, just adjusting my expectations. Good, because we're almost there. The ranch appeared gradually rather than all at once. First the fence line, wire strung between weathered posts that needed replacing. Then the windmill, its blades turning lazily in the constant wind. Then the barn, larger than she'd expected and in better shape than the house, which came into view last. The house was a disappointment. It sat in a shallow valley, a simple structure of log and plank that had clearly been built in stages. The original cabin formed the core, with additions tacked on over time in a haphazard way that suggested necessity rather than planning. The roof sagged on one side. One shutter hung crooked. The front porch listed slightly to the left. The whole thing had a defeated air, like it was slowly surrendering to the weight of weather and time. Nathaniel pulled the wagon to a stop in front of it and sat for a moment, just looking. I know it's not much. It's fixable. Abigail climbed down without waiting for help. The bones are good. It just needs attention. Hasn't had that in a while. He jumped down beside her. Sarah kept it nice. I've let things slide. That was an understatement. As they approached, Abigail could see peeling paint, cracked windows, and weeds growing up through the porch boards. But the structure was sound. The logs were solid, the foundation steady. It wasn't ruined, just neglected. Nathaniel unlocked the front door, and the smell hit her immediately. Stale air, dust, something vaguely rotten from the kitchen. He grimaced. I haven't been keeping up with cleaning. Been sleeping in the barn most nights. It's less depressing. Abigail stepped inside and looked around. The main room served as kitchen and living area combined. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. A table and chairs sat near the kitchen area, covered in dust and what looked like several weeks of unwashed dishes. Shelves lined the walls, half empty and disorganized. A door led to what was probably the bedroom. Another led to the addition. She could see through it to a smaller room with a narrow bed and a trunk. It was a disaster, but it was also salvageable. I'll start unpacking the wagon, Nathaniel said, clearly uncomfortable. You can, look around, see what you're getting into. He retreated quickly, leaving her alone in the gloom. Abigail walked through slowly, assessing. The floors were pine, worn smooth but sturdy. The windows, though dirty and cracked in places, let in decent light. The fireplace was well built. The kitchen had a good stove and a hand pump for water, a luxury compared to hauling from a well. The bedroom was Nathaniel's, clearly. Unmade bed, clothes piled on a chair, boots in the corner. She backed out quickly, feeling like an intruder. The smaller room had been Sarah's sewing room, judging by the fabric scraps and the treadle machine in the corner. It still smelled faintly of lavender. She found Nathaniel in the yard, unloading supplies with methodical efficiency. There's a chicken coop around back, he said without looking up. Hasn't had birds in it since November. The garden's completely overgrown. There's a root cellar behind the house, still has some preserves from last year, if you trust them. Where will I sleep? He paused, a sack of flour balanced on his shoulder. The sewing room. I cleaned it out some last week, put fresh bedding on the cot. It's small, but it's private. Has a door that locks, if that matters to you. It does. Thank you. He nodded and carried the flour inside. They worked in silence for the next hour, unloading the wagon and stacking supplies in the kitchen. When the last crate was inside, Nathaniel straightened and wiped his forehead. I need to check on the herd, make sure they didn't break through the fence line while I was gone. There's a mare in the barn. Her name's Bess. She's gentle. You can ride her if you need to go anywhere, but don't go far without telling me first. Easy to get lost. When will you be back? Supper time, probably. Maybe later if I find problems. He hesitated. You going to be all right here alone? I've been alone before. Not like this, you haven't. But he didn't argue further. He saddled a rangy gelding from the barn and rode out, heading northwest toward the distant hills. Abigail stood in the yard and watched him disappear. The silence that followed was absolute. No neighbors calling to each other. No wagons rattling past. No church bells or dogs barking or any of the ambient noise that had formed the background of her entire life. Just wind and the creak of the windmill and the vast emptiness of Wyoming pressing in from all sides. She could leave. The thought arrived unbidden but persistent. She could pack her trunk, ride the mare back to Cheyenne, take the next stage east. Nathaniel had promised to pay her passage if she decided this wasn't for her. She could be home in 2 weeks, back to familiar discomfort instead of this strange new isolation. But then what? Back to being the dependable daughter. Back to living in Caroline's shadow. Back to a future that would never be truly hers. No, she said aloud, just to hear a voice. You're staying. She went inside and got to work. First, she opened every window, despite the cold air that rushed in. The house needed to breathe. Then she started on the dishes, heating water on the stove and scrubbing crusted food from plates and pots that had been sitting for who knows how long. It took 3 full basins of water before she had them clean. Next, she swept the floors, raising clouds of dust that made her cough. She found a rag and wiped down the table, the shelves, the windowsills. She reorganized the kitchen supplies, grouping like items together, throwing out things that had gone bad. She found a broom and attacked the cobwebs in the corners. By the time the sun was lowering toward the horizon, she'd transformed the main room from actively depressing to merely shabby. It still needed work. The curtains were beyond saving, the shelves needed repair, the whole place needed paint. But it was clean, functional. She heard horses outside and looked up to see Nathaniel riding in, leading a second horse that was limping. He dismounted quickly and called out, "Abigail, you know anything about horses?" She went outside. "Some. What's wrong?" "Cut his leg on barbed wire. It's not deep, but it needs cleaning." He was already leading the injured horse toward the barn. "I've got supplies in there, but I could use an extra set of hands." She followed him into the barn, which was warmer than the house and smelled of hay and horses. Nathaniel tied the injured horse to a post and grabbed a bucket. "Pump's by the door. Fill this while I get the medical kit." They worked together in the dim barn, Nathaniel holding the nervous horse steady, while Abigail cleaned the wound with surprising gentleness. The cut wasn't deep, like he'd said, but it was dirty. She flushed it carefully, then helped him apply salve and wrap it with clean cloth. "You've done this before," he observed. "We had horses in Nebraska. I helped the veterinarian sometimes when Father couldn't afford to pay him in cash." She tied off the bandage. "He taught me the basics. That'll come in handy." Nathaniel patted the horse's neck. "Thanks. I can usually manage alone, but it's easier with 2. They walked back to the house together, and Nathaniel stopped at the threshold, staring. "You've been busy." It needed it. She moved past him to the stove. "I found some potatoes in the cellar, and there's bacon in the supplies. I can make something edible if you're hungry." "I'm hungry." He hung his hat on a peg by the door, a peg she'd just cleared of old harnesses. "The place looks different. Better." "It looks clean. There's a difference." She started slicing potatoes. "Tomorrow I'll tackle the bedroom and the sewing room. Then I'll start on the real work." He pulled out a chair, she'd washed those too, and sat down, watching her move around the kitchen with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, feeling self-conscious. "Nothing. Just... Sarah used to say a house wasn't a home unless someone was cooking in it. Haven't heard that sound in months. The sizzle of food, I mean." "You've been living on cold beans, haven't you?" "Mostly." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Sometimes I cook. Usually I just eat whatever's easiest." She didn't comment, just focused on the meal. They ate at the clean table, and the food was simple, but hot and well-seasoned. Nathaniel ate like a man who'd forgotten what a real meal tasted like, cleaning his plate and accepting seconds without hesitation. "This is good," he said finally. "Really good. Thank you." "It's just fried potatoes and bacon. It's the first real meal I've had since November that I didn't have to cook myself. Trust me, it's good." After supper, he helped her wash the dishes without being asked, which surprised her. Then he excused himself to do evening chores, feeding the horses, checking the animals, securing the barn. Abigail prepared the sewing room for sleep, unfolding her grandmother's quilt onto the narrow cot. When Nathaniel came back in, he paused at her door. "I'll be up before dawn. Don't feel like you need to match my schedule. Sleep as long as you want. I'm used to early mornings. Still, you've been traveling for a week. Take the time if you need it." He shifted awkwardly. "Good night, Abigail." "Good night." She closed the door and listened to him move through the house, his boots heavy on the floor, the creak of his bedroom door. Then silence. She changed into her nightgown and lay down on the cot, which was surprisingly comfortable. Sleep didn't come immediately. The house made unfamiliar noises, settling sounds, wind whistling through cracks, the scurry of mice in the walls. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance. Everything was strange and new and slightly frightening. But she'd done it. She'd survived the first day. She'd made the house cleaner, helped with an injured horse, cooked a meal. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. She fell asleep thinking about what she'd tackle tomorrow. The week that followed established a rhythm. Nathaniel left at dawn and returned at dusk, spending his days managing livestock and repairing fence lines. Abigail threw herself into the house with single-minded determination. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, mended curtains, and slowly brought order to chaos. On the third day, she ventured out to the chicken coop. It was empty and filthy, but structurally sound. She spent the morning cleaning it, then approached Nathaniel at supper. "We need chickens." He looked up from his plate. "I know, haven't gotten around to it. Can we get some in town? I can manage them. We need eggs. Next time I go to Cheyenne, I'll buy a dozen hens and a rooster." He paused. "Or you could come with me. Pick them out yourself. When are you going?" "End of the week, probably. Need to pick up more lumber." "I'll come." The trip to Cheyenne became her first real venture off the ranch. They left early, the wagon rattling over the rough track. Abigail paid careful attention this time, memorizing landmarks, the creek crossing, the Henderson Gate, Devil's Thumb in the distance. In town, Nathaniel gave her money and directions to the feed store while he went to the lumber yard. She bought 12 healthy hens and 1 aggressive rooster, along with feed and supplies. The store owner, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, looked her over. "You're the one staying out at the Walker place." "I am." Abigail met her gaze evenly. "Heard you're the sister, not the one he sent for." Small towns were the same everywhere, apparently. "That's correct." The woman counted out change. "Well, you look sturdier than what I heard about the other one. Probably for the best. That ranch needs someone who can handle hard work, not someone who'll faint at the sight of a dead chicken." It wasn't quite approval, but it wasn't hostility either. Abigail took it as a win. They loaded the chickens into crates in the wagon bed. On the ride back, Nathaniel glanced at her. "Mrs. Patterson give you the town gossip?" She mentioned that people are talking. "They'll talk regardless. Frontier towns don't have much else for entertainment." He didn't seem bothered. "Long as you don't care what they say, they'll get bored eventually." "I don't care." And she found, surprisingly, that she meant it. The opinions of strangers in a town she barely visited didn't matter. What mattered was whether she could make this work. The chickens settled into their coop and began laying within days. Fresh eggs transformed their meals. Abigail started baking bread, making proper breakfasts, cooking dinners that were more than just fried meat and potatoes. The house continued to improve under her attention. Curtains mended and rehung, shelves repaired, walls scrubbed clean. Nathaniel noticed. He didn't say much, but she caught him sometimes just standing in the doorway, looking around like he was seeing the place for the first time. Once, she found him running his hand over the clean table with an expression of profound sadness. "Sarah would have liked what you've done," he said quietly. "She'd say it looks like a home again." "I'm not trying to replace her." "I know, but it's still good, what you're doing." He cleared his throat. "I appreciate it." 2 weeks in, Mrs. Chen arrived for her twice-weekly visit. She was a tiny Chinese woman with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude that Abigail immediately respected. She looked Abigail up and down, grunted something that might have been approval, and got to work on the laundry without preamble. "You stay?" she asked Abigail while they hung sheets together. For now. Good. House needs woman. Man alone is disaster. She gestured at Nathaniel, who was working on the porch. That one is good, man. Sad, but good. You work hard, he work hard. Maybe make good life. Maybe. Maybe is better than nothing. Mrs. Chen pinned a sheet with practiced efficiency. You cook? Yes. Then you stay. Man who eats good food doesn't want wife to leave. It was such a pragmatic view of marriage that Abigail almost laughed. But there was wisdom in it too. She was proving her value, demonstrating that she belonged here. Not through romance or beauty, but through sheer competence. The fourth week brought their first real test. Nathaniel came back one evening looking frustrated, and at supper he barely touched his food. Problem? Abigail asked. Fence is down on this north section. Storm damage from last month that I never got around to fixing. Cattle are drifting onto Henderson's land. He rubbed his face. I need to spend tomorrow riding the boundary, pushing them back and repairing fence. It's a two-person job, really, but I'll manage. I can help. He looked up surprised. You know how to fix fence? I can learn, and I can ride well enough to help push cattle. It's hard work, long day in the saddle. I'm not delicate. She met his eyes. I came here to be a partner, not an ornament. Let me help. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, we leave at dawn. Wear your sturdiest clothes and bring water. It'll be a long day. They rode out the next morning with the sun barely cresting the horizon. Nathaniel led them north toward rougher country, the land rising into rocky hills dotted with scrub pine. The fence line when they reached it was a disaster. Post down, wire tangled, a gap wide enough to drive a wagon through. Storm took out 3 sections, Nathaniel said grimly. This'll take most of the day. They worked in the cold morning air, Nathaniel digging new post holes while Abigail gathered the scattered wire. Her hands were bleeding within an hour, the barbs catching her despite her gloves. Her back ached from bending. But she kept working, matching his pace, refusing to slow down. Around noon, they stopped to eat the bread and cheese she'd packed. Nathaniel looked at her hands. You're bleeding. I've had worse. Still. He pulled out a handkerchief, clean, she noted, and wrapped her worst cut. Can't have you losing fingers before the month's up. Wouldn't that be a tragedy? He smiled at that, and she realized it was the first time she'd joked with him. Something loosened between them, some invisible tension easing. They worked until the sun was setting, repairing 2 of the 3 sections. Nathaniel decided the third could wait until morning. They rode back exhausted, Abigail barely able to stay in the saddle. Every muscle screamed, her hands throbbed, but she'd done it. She'd kept pace with him all day, and he hadn't had to slow down or accommodate her weakness. At the house, she stumbled inside and collapsed into a chair. Nathaniel pumped water for them both, and they drank in silence. You did good today, he said finally. Better than good. Most women couldn't have handled that. I'm not most women. No, you're not. He stood, wincing slightly. I'll handle supper tonight. You rest. I can rest, Abigail. You earned it. She was too tired to argue. She watched him move around the kitchen with unpracticed hands, making a simple stew that was slightly oversalted but edible. They ate together, both too exhausted for much conversation, then retreated to their separate rooms. Abigail lay in bed, her body aching in 1,000 places, and felt something like satisfaction. She'd proven herself today, not as a replacement for someone else, but as herself, strong, capable, unbreakable. The month was almost up. Soon Nathaniel would have to decide if she could stay. She found that she wanted to. This harsh land, this lonely house, this quiet man. They'd gotten under her skin in a way she hadn't expected. This felt like the beginning of something real. She fell asleep wondering if he felt it too. The conversation happened 3 days before the month ended. Over breakfast, neither of them was really eating. Nathaniel pushed eggs around his plate while Abigail pretended to be interested in her coffee. The unspoken question sat between them like a third person at the table. Finally, Nathaniel set down his fork. We should talk about the arrangement. Abigail's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice steady. All right, the month's almost up. I said I'd be honest about whether this was working. He met her eyes directly. It's working, Abigail. Better than I expected. You've done more in 4 weeks than I managed in 4 months. The house is livable again. The chickens are laying. You can ride and work fence and handle yourself out here. I'd be a fool to let you go." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by something more complicated. But I need to know if you want to stay. Not because you feel obligated, not because going home would be admitting defeat, because you actually want to build a life here." He paused. "With me." She looked at him. Really looked. He was tired, always tired, the weight of running the ranch alone etched into the lines around his eyes. But he was also decent, fair. He'd given her space when she needed it and help when she asked. He didn't try to diminish her or make her small. He treated her like a partner, not a servant or a decoration. "I want to stay," she said quietly. "I'm not in love with you, Nathaniel. I won't lie about that. But I respect you. I think we work well together, and I believe we could build something good here if we're both willing to try." Something shifted in his expression. Not disappointment exactly, but maybe a small grief for what this wasn't and would never be. "I'm not in love with you either. Don't know if I'm capable of that anymore after losing Thomas and Sarah. But I like you. I trust you. That's more than most marriages start with." "Then we're agreed?" "We're agreed." He stood up. "I'll ride into town tomorrow. Arrange for the preacher. We can do it simple, just the legal part. No fuss." "That suits me fine." He nodded and headed for the door, then turned back. "Abigail? Thank you for being honest, for not pretending this is something it's not. We started with honesty. Seems stupid to stop now." That almost smile appeared. The one she'd learned meant he was pleased. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with her coffee and the sudden reality that she was about to marry a stranger. They married on a Thursday afternoon in the small church in Cheyenne, with Mrs. Chen and the store owner, Mrs. Patterson, as witnesses. The preacher was an elderly man who seemed confused about why they weren't having a proper ceremony, but he performed the service without comment. Abigail wore her best dress, still plain, still practical, and Nathaniel wore a clean shirt and his only suit jacket, which was tight across the shoulders. The whole thing took less than 20 minutes. They signed the papers, paid the fee, and walked out as husband and wife. It felt anticlimactic, like checking an item off a list rather than beginning a new life. On the ride back to the ranch, Nathaniel cleared his throat. "I want you to know, I don't expect, that is, I'm not assuming we'll—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Are you trying to say you won't force yourself on me?" "Yes." "That. We can figure out the physical side of things when we're both ready. Or not at all, if you prefer. I'm not going to demand anything just because we signed papers." Despite the awkwardness of the conversation, Abigail felt grateful. "I appreciate that. I imagine these things work better when both people actually want them." "That's been my experience." He paused. Limited experience, but still. They lapsed into silence, but it was comfortable rather than tense. When they arrived home, and it was home now, she realized, truly hers, Mrs. Chen had left a pot of stew and fresh bread as a wedding gift. They ate quietly, exhaustion from the long day settling over both of them. That night, Abigail moved her belongings from the sewing room to the bedroom. Nathaniel had already cleared space in the dresser and the wardrobe, his things pushed to one side to make room for hers. The bed was large enough that they could sleep without touching if they chose. She changed into her nightgown in the privacy of the corner while he did the same, both of them moving with careful politeness around each other. When they finally lay down, a good foot of space between them, Nathaniel spoke into the darkness. "This is strange. Very strange," Abigail agreed. "But it's all right. Strange doesn't mean bad." "No, it doesn't." She lay awake for a long time, hyper-aware of his breathing beside her, the warmth radiating from his body, the sheer foreignness of sharing a bed with another person. But eventually exhaustion won, and she slept. The days that followed were an adjustment. They learned each other's rhythms, figured out how to move around each other in the small space of the house. Nathaniel started coming in for lunch instead of eating cold food in the barn. Abigail started riding out with him sometimes, learning the boundaries of the property, getting comfortable with the land. They worked together on projects, repairing the porch, expanding the chicken coop, planning a garden for spring. They didn't talk about love or feelings or the future beyond practical matters, but slowly something was building between them. A partnership, maybe even a friendship. 3 weeks after the wedding, the weather turned. Abigail woke to the sound of wind howling around the house, stronger than usual. The room was cold despite the fire Nathaniel must have built in the main room. He was already up, standing at the window, fully dressed, staring out at darkness. "What's wrong?" "Storm coming. Bad one." He didn't turn around. "I can feel it. Pressure's all wrong." She joined him at the window. The sky was still dark, but she could see clouds massing on the horizon, black and heavy. The wind bent the grass flat. "How bad?" "Could be nothing. Could be a real monster." He moved away from the window. "I need to secure the barn, move the herd closer to shelter, check all the fence lines. If this hits hard, we could lose animals." "I'll help." "No. You stay here. Keep the fire going. If this turns into what I think it might, the house could take damage. I need you to manage that." She wanted to argue, but the set of his jaw told her it would be pointless. "Be careful." "Always am." He left just as the first drops of rain started falling. Within an hour, the storm hit in earnest. Rain came down in sheets, driven nearly horizontal by wind that shook the house. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows. Abigail moved through the house, checking for leaks, placing pots and buckets where water started dripping through the roof. The storm lasted all day and into the night. Nathaniel didn't return. Abigail tried not to panic, told herself he was sheltering in the barn or with the herd, that he knew this land and could handle himself. But as darkness fell and the storm intensified, fear crept in. She made coffee she didn't drink and paced the floor, jumping at every crack of thunder. The wind was screaming now, a constant roar that made the house groan. One of the shutters tore loose and banged against the wall repeatedly until she braved the porch to secure it, getting soaked in the process. It was past midnight when she heard the horse. She ran to the door and yanked it open. Nathaniel was dismounting in the rain, moving stiffly. Even in the darkness, she could see he was exhausted. "Thank heaven," she breathed, then caught herself. "I know what you mean." He stumbled slightly on the porch steps. "It's bad out there, Abigail. Real bad. Lost part of the fence on the east side, cattle scattered everywhere. And the creek's rising fast, faster than I've ever seen it." She helped him inside, noting the way he favored his left side. "Are you hurt?" "Bruised ribs. Horse threw me when lightning struck too close. I'm fine." But he winced as he sat down. "The calves are the problem. There's about 15 of them trapped on the wrong side of the creek. Water's too high for them to cross back, and it's still rising. If it keeps up, they'll either drown or get swept downstream." "Can they survive until morning?" "Maybe, but I don't know if the water will drop by then or keep rising. Could lose all of them." He looked at her, something raw in his expression. "Those calves are next year's herd. Losing them means losing income we can't afford to lose. I should go back out, try to—" "You can barely stand. You're not going anywhere." She moved to the stove. "Let me make you coffee, get you warm and dry, then we'll figure out what to do." "There's nothing to figure out. I have to save those calves." "Not alone, you don't." He stared at her. "Abigail, I'm not taking you out in this. The creek is raging, the visibility is near zero, and if something goes wrong, then something goes wrong with both of us instead of just you." She met his eyes. "You said you wanted a partner. That means I don't sit here safe while you risk yourself. We go together, or we don't go at all." "You don't know what you're saying. That water is deadly right now." "Then teach me. Tell me what we need to do, and I'll do it." She sat down across from him. "Nathaniel, I've spent my whole life watching other people take risks while I stayed safe. I'm done with that. Those calves are part of our future, our livelihood. If there's a chance to save them, we take it. Together." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but you do exactly what I say, when I say it. No arguing, no hesitating. Agreed?" "Agreed." They prepared quickly. Abigail changed into her sturdiest clothes and boots. Nathaniel rigged ropes and gathered supplies. Lanterns, blankets, anything they might need. The plan was simple and terrifying. Ride to the creek, assess the situation, and if possible, guide the calves to a crossing point where the water was shallower. They rode out into the storm together, the rain pelting them mercilessly. The wind nearly tore Abigail from her saddle twice. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes, a nightmare world of bending grass and driving rain. They followed the fence line east, Nathaniel in the lead, until they heard it. The creek. It wasn't the gentle stream Abigail had seen before. It was a monster, swollen to 3 times its normal size, brown water churning with debris, branches, fence posts, things she couldn't identify. The sound was deafening, a roar that drowned out even the thunder. Nathaniel pointed downstream. In the next lightning flash, Abigail saw them, calves huddled on a small rise that was rapidly disappearing under rising water. They were bawling, terrified, trapped between the surging creek and a steep embankment they couldn't climb. "We need to get upstream of them," Nathaniel shouted over the noise. "There's a crossing about a quarter-mile up, shallower, rockier bottom. If we can push them that direction, they might make it across. And if they won't go, then we go in after them." They rowed upstream, fighting the wind and rain, until they reached the crossing. It was shallower, but the current was still vicious, the water murky and full of debris. Nathaniel dismounted and tested the depth with the long stick. "It's passable. Barely. We'll cross, come up behind the calves, drive them back this way." He looked at her. "You sure about this?" Abigail's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice, but she nodded. "I'm sure." They crossed the creek together, the horses struggling against the current, water rising to their saddles. Abigail gripped her reins so tight her hands ached, fighting panic as debris slammed into her horse's legs. But they made it across, emerging on the far bank soaked and shaking. The calves saw them coming and panicked, scattering in different directions. Nathaniel cursed and spurred his horse forward, trying to turn them back toward the crossing. Abigail followed his lead, riding hard, using her horse to cut off the calves that tried to break away downstream. It was chaos. The calves were stupid with fear, running in every direction except the right one. The rain made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Lightning struck somewhere close, the crack of thunder instantaneous and deafening. Abigail's horse reared and she barely kept her seat. "Drive them toward the water," Nathaniel was shouting, trying to herd 3 calves at once. "Don't let them scatter." She kicked her horse forward, pushing 2 calves toward the creek. They balked at the water's edge, bawling. She rode up behind them, making herself big and loud, forcing them into the current. The first one stepped in tentatively, then committed, swimming hard for the opposite bank. The second followed. "That's it!" Nathaniel had gotten 5 more into the water. "Keep pushing!" They worked in desperate tandem, driving calves into the creek and praying they'd make it across. Most did, swimming frantically, emerging on the far bank exhausted but alive. But 3 of them broke away, running downstream toward where the water was deepest and fastest. Nathaniel swore and rode after them. Abigail followed, her horse slipping on the muddy bank. The calves reached the edge where the water was churning violently, hesitated, then one of them fell in, pushed by the others or just losing its footing. She couldn't tell. The current grabbed it immediately, sweeping it downstream. Without thinking, Nathaniel spurred his horse into the water after it. "Nathaniel, no!" Abigail screamed, but he was already committed, his horse swimming hard against the current, trying to reach the struggling calf. She watched in horror as a massive branch came spinning downstream, straight toward him. He saw it too late to dodge. It slammed into his horse's shoulder, and both horse and rider went under. Abigail didn't remember making the decision. She just found herself in the water, the cold shocking the breath from her lungs, the current trying to rip her away. Her horse was swimming, fighting to stay upright, and she clung to its mane, searching frantically for Nathaniel. There, his horse had surfaced, swimming toward the bank without its rider. And there, Nathaniel's head broke the surface downstream, his arm wrapped around the calf, fighting to keep them both afloat. She kicked her horse toward him, screaming his name. The current was pulling them both downstream toward where the creek narrowed and the water turned white with rapids. If they reached that point, they'd both drown. Her horse reached him just as he was going under again. She grabbed his collar, hauling with strength she didn't know she had. He grabbed the saddle with his free hand, still somehow holding on to the calf with the other. "Let it go!" she screamed. "No!" He was coughing up water, but his grip didn't loosen. "Pull us to the bank!" She turned her horse toward shore, the animal struggling against the weight and the current. It was impossible. They were too heavy, the water too strong. But the horse kept swimming, kept fighting, and inch by impossible inch they moved toward the bank. Nathaniel's feet found bottom first. He stood, waist deep, still holding the calf, and pushed her horse toward shallower water. Abigail slid from the saddle into water up to her chest, grabbed the calf's other side, and together they hauled it to dry ground. The calf collapsed, coughing up water but alive. Nathaniel collapsed beside it, his breathing ragged. Abigail knelt in the mud, shaking so hard she could barely stay upright. You stupid, stupid man, she gasped. You nearly died for a calf. Couldn't let it drown. He was still coughing. Couldn't just watch it go. So instead, I had to watch you almost go. She was crying now, she realized, tears mixing with rain and creek water. Don't ever do that again. He looked at her, really looked, and saw her terror. Something in his expression shifted. He reached out and pulled her against him, both of them soaked and shaking and covered in mud. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're right. It was stupid. His arms tightened around her. But thank you for coming after me, for not letting me drown. They sat like that for a long moment, holding each other in the rain, both too exhausted and overwhelmed to move. The storm was already starting to break, the thunder moving away, the rain lightening. The crisis was passing. Eventually they stood, collected the horses, and made their way back to the crossing. All the calves had made it across except the one they'd saved, which followed them docilely now, traumatized into obedience. They crossed the creek one final time, the water already starting to recede, and rode slowly home through the thinning rain. At the house, they stripped off their soaked clothes on the porch, not caring about modesty anymore. Abigail built up the fire while Nathaniel heated water. They bathed separately, warming frozen limbs, checking each other afterward for injuries neither had noticed in the chaos. Nathaniel's ribs were worse than he'd admitted, purple-black bruises spreading across his left side. Abigail had a gash on her arm she didn't remember getting. They bandaged each other with clumsy hands, too tired to talk. When they finally crawled into bed, they lay close together for warmth, the space between them gone. Nathaniel's arm was around her, her head on his shoulder. Neither acknowledged the change, but it was there. We saved them, he murmured into her hair. All 15. Against the odds, we saved them. We did. She pressed closer, seeking his warmth. Together. Together, he agreed. Then quieter. I saw you in that water coming after me, and I thought I'd gotten you killed for a calf. And I realized I cared more about you living than about anything else. The ranch, the cattle, any of it. I'd trade it all to keep you safe. Abigail lifted her head to look at him. His eyes were serious, honest in a way that made her chest tight. I felt the same, she admitted. When I saw you go under, nothing else mattered. Not the calves, not the ranch, just you. He reached up, brushing wet hair from her face. That feels like something more than partnership. It does. Is that all right? That it's becoming something more? She thought about it. Really thought. This wasn't the fairy tale Caroline had wanted, all roses and poetry. This was harder, rawer, built on fear and desperation, and two people choosing each other in a moment of crisis. But it was real. It was theirs. Yes, she said. It's all right. He kissed her then, tentative and gentle, asking permission even as he gave it. She kissed him back, tasting rain and creek water and something new. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. I don't know if I'm any good at this, at loving someone. Haven't had practice in a long time. I haven't had practice at all, she admitted. We'll figure it out together. Together, he said again, like it was becoming their promise. They fell asleep tangled together, exhausted and bruised, and somehow more whole than either had been in months. Outside, the storm had passed completely. The sky was clearing, and somewhere in the muddy pasture, 15 calves that should have drowned were settling down to sleep, their future secured by two people who'd learned what they meant to each other in the midst of chaos. When morning came, they woke still wrapped around each other. Nathaniel's hand was splayed across her back, her leg thrown over his. The intimacy of it should have been awkward, but it felt natural. Right. We should check the damage, he said, but he didn't move. We should, she agreed, also not moving. They lay there a while longer, neither willing to break the spell. Finally, Nathaniel kissed her forehead and extracted himself carefully, groaning as his bruised ribs protested. The ranch had survived better than expected. Some fence down, a section of the barn roof damaged, the chicken coop flooded but intact. The calves were all accounted for, muddy but healthy. The work of repairing the damage would take weeks, but they had weeks. They had time. Over breakfast, Nathaniel took her hand across the table. Last night changed things. I know. I meant what I said, about you mattering more than anything else. He hesitated. I'm falling in love with you, Abigail. Maybe I have been since you first got off that stage looking like you were ready to fight the whole territory. But last night made it clear. You're not my second choice or my practical solution. You're you. And I want you here, not because I need help running a ranch, but because I can't imagine doing this without you anymore. Her throat tightened. I love you too. I didn't expect to. Didn't plan on it. But somewhere between the chicken coop and nearly drowning together, it happened. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, he said, deadpan. She laughed, surprised by joy. We're terrible at this. We are, but we're terrible at it together. He stood and pulled her up into a kiss that was deeper than the night before, more certain. When they broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers again. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. The ranch, the repairs, building this life. Then we better get started. They walked out into the morning together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. The land stretched out before them, harsh and beautiful in theirs. The storm had tested them, and they'd survived it. They'd survived it together, and in doing so, they'd found what neither had been looking for but both desperately needed: each other. The weeks after the storm passed in a blur of hard work and quiet contentment. They fell into a new rhythm together, one that included stolen kisses in the barn and conversations that lasted long into the night. Nathaniel taught her to read the land the way he did, to see signs of weather in the sky and animal behavior. She taught him that a house could be more than just shelter, that small comforts mattered even on a working ranch. The damaged fence got repaired. The barn roof was patched. The garden that Abigail had planned became a reality, and she spent mornings working the soil while Nathaniel handled the livestock. They worked separately but together, each managing their domain while building something larger than either could alone. It was during one of Mrs. Chen's visits, about 6 weeks after the storm, that the first crack appeared in their hard-won peace. Mrs. Chen arrived with her usual supplies and immediately pulled Nathaniel aside. Abigail tried not to eavesdrop, but the small house didn't allow for much privacy. She caught fragments, something about talk in town, questions being asked, people wondering. When Mrs. Chen left, Nathaniel was quiet through lunch. Finally, Abigail set down her fork. What did she tell you? He hesitated, then sighed. There's been talk about you being the replacement, about how I sent for one sister and got stuck with another. I see. She kept her voice level, though something sharp twisted in her chest. And what exactly are people saying? Does it matter? It's just gossip. It matters to me. He met her eyes. They're saying I settled, that I took you because I was desperate, not because I wanted you, that you're making the best of being second choice. His jaw tightened. And there's been some speculation about whether the marriage is even real, or if you're just working here under false pretenses. Abigail absorbed this, the familiar sting of being compared to Caroline rising up despite the months she'd been free of it. What do you think? I think people should mind their own damn business. He reached across the table for her hand. But I also think we need to go to town together soon. Let them see us as a married couple, not as separate people they can gossip about. I'm not going to perform for the entertainment of bored townspeople. I'm not asking you to perform. I'm asking you to stand beside me and let them draw their own conclusions. He squeezed her hand. You are not second choice, Abigail. You were the better choice, and I want everyone to know it. Despite her irritation, warmth spread through her chest. When? Next week. There's a community gathering, nothing fancy, just families getting together before winter sets in hard. We'll go, show our faces, and come home. The gathering was held at the Henderson Ranch, which apparently had the largest barn in the area. Abigail dressed carefully, choosing her best dress but refusing to fuss beyond that. She was who she was. Pretending to be something else would only prove the gossips right. The ride to Henderson's place took 2 hours. As they approached, Abigail could see wagons already gathered, families milling around outside the barn. Children ran between the adults, their shrieks carrying on the wind. Smoke rose from several fire pits where food was being prepared. Nathaniel helped her down from the wagon, then surprised her by keeping hold of her hand as they walked toward the crowd. It was a statement, she realized. A public claiming. Clara. Clara Henderson spotted them first. She was a tall woman with iron-gray hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. She approached with the direct manner Nathaniel had warned Abigail about. So this is the wife. Clara looked Abigail up and down with an assessing gaze that would have made a weaker woman flinch. Heard you helped save the calves during that storm. We both did, Abigail said evenly. Also heard you weren't the one he sent for originally. That's true. My sister wasn't suited for this life. I am. Clara's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Direct. I like that. Too many women out here try to be all sweetness and light when what's needed is a strong back and a firm hand. She gestured toward the barn. Food's inside. Fair warning. The other wives are going to pick you apart like vultures on a carcass. Don't let them see you bleed. I don't plan to. Good. Clara nodded at Nathaniel. You picked better than you knew, Walker, even if you didn't know you were picking. She walked away, leaving them standing there. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow at Abigail. That went better than expected. Is she always that blunt? That was her being friendly. Inside the barn, tables were laden with food brought by every family. The space was crowded with people, ranchers and their wives, children of all ages, a few unmarried men standing awkwardly in one corner. Conversations died down when Abigail and Nathaniel entered, dozens of eyes turning to assess the newcomer. Nathaniel kept his hand on the small of her back as they made their way to the food tables. Abigail could feel the stares, hear the whispers starting up again. She held her head high, refusing to show discomfort. A group of women were clustered near the desserts, and one of them, a blonde woman with a pretty face and calculating eyes, stepped forward. You must be Nathaniel's wife. I'm Margaret Sullivan. She didn't offer her hand. We've all been so curious to meet you. It's not every day a man sends for one bride and gets another. Life is full of surprises, Abigail said neutrally. Indeed. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. I knew your sister, actually. Well, I knew of her from the letters she showed around before the wedding was arranged. Such a lovely girl, very refined. She is, Abigail agreed. She's also completely unsuited for ranch life. I'm not. How practical of you. Margaret's tone made it clear she didn't consider practicality a virtue. Though I imagine it must be difficult always being compared to her, knowing you're the substitute. The other women had gone quiet, watching this exchange with avid interest. Abigail felt Nathaniel tense beside her, but she squeezed his arm gently, silently asking him to let her handle this. I'm not the substitute, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm the upgrade. She kept her voice pleasant, conversational even. My sister is beautiful and refined, yes. She can also barely milk a cow without fainting. She would have been miserable here, and Nathaniel would have been stuck with a wife who couldn't pull her weight. Instead, he has me, someone who can work beside him, manage a household, and build a life in hard country. If that makes me second choice in your eyes, I'm comfortable with that. Margaret's smile had frozen. One of the other women, a plump brunette with kind eyes, let out a surprised laugh before covering her mouth. Well, Margaret said stiffly, how very forthright. I find it saves time. Abigail turned to the kind-eyed woman. I'm Abigail Walker, Ruth Martinez. My husband and I have the place about 15 miles north. She smiled genuinely. Pay Margaret no mind. She's been trying to marry her daughter off to Nathaniel for 2 years. She's just sour it didn't work out. Margaret made an outraged noise and stalked off. Ruth laughed openly now. That was magnificent. Most new women try to play nice with her, and she eats them alive. You didn't even flinch. I grew up with a beautiful younger sister everyone preferred, Abigail said. I learned early that pretending didn't change reality. Better to own it and move on. I think we're going to be friends. Ruth linked her arm through Abigail's. Come on, let me introduce you to the women who aren't vipers. There's at least 3 of us. Nathaniel released her with a small smile, and Abigail found herself swept into Ruth's orbit. The kind-eyed woman introduced her to Sarah Blackwood, a quiet woman about Abigail's age who ran a small horse breeding operation, and Emma Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter-in-law, who helped manage the laundry business. They talked about ranching, about the challenges of frontier life, about the upcoming winter. It was refreshingly honest conversation. No false pleasantries, no subtle digs. These were women who understood hard work and didn't have energy to waste on pretense. Across the barn, Nathaniel was talking with a group of ranchers. Abigail caught his eye once and saw pride there, unmistakable. He nodded slightly, and she felt that now familiar warmth spread through her chest. The gathering broke up as the sun started setting. Families loaded into wagons, children complaining about leaving. Nathaniel helped Abigail up into their wagon, then climbed up beside her. They were almost out of the Henderson property when they heard horses approaching fast. 3 riders came up alongside them, Ben Henderson and 2 of his sons, all looking grim. "Walker, hold up," Ben called. Nathaniel pulled the horses to a stop. "Problem? Might be. Just got word from town. There's been some fence cutting on the eastern properties. 3 ranches hit in the last week." Ben's expression was dark. Someone's trying to cause trouble, maybe steal cattle in the confusion. Wanted to warn you to keep an eye out. "I'll watch the fence lines," Nathaniel said. "Thanks for the warning." Ben nodded, then looked at Abigail. "Ma'am, you know how to shoot?" "I can learn. See that you do. If there's trouble and Nathaniel's out with the herd, you'll need to be able to protect yourself and the property." He tipped his hat. "Welcome to Wyoming, Mrs. Walker. It's not always this exciting." The Hendersons rode off, leaving them in the growing darkness. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, then flicked the reins. "When we get home, I'm teaching you to shoot." "Tonight?" "Tomorrow, but soon." He glanced at her. "I don't like the idea of you alone at the ranch if there's someone cutting fences. That's not random mischief. That's intentional harm." They made it home without incident, but Abigail could feel Nathaniel's tension. He checked all the outbuildings twice before coming inside, and he brought his rifle in from the barn, something he'd never done before. True to his word, the next morning he took her out to a cleared area behind the barn and taught her to shoot. The rifle was heavy, the recoil brutal, and her first 3 shots missed the target completely. But by the 10th shot, she was hitting consistently, and by the 20th, she was grouped tight enough that Nathaniel grunted approval. "You're a natural, better than I was when I started. I'm motivated. I don't want to be helpless if trouble comes." "You're never helpless, Abigail. You're the strongest person I know." He took the rifle back, checking it with practiced efficiency. "But knowing how to defend yourself in the ranch, that's just smart." Over the next few days, Nathaniel rode the fence lines obsessively, looking for signs of tampering. He came back each evening tired and on edge, jumping at unfamiliar sounds. Abigail kept the rifle loaded and near the door, a precaution that felt both necessary and deeply unsettling. The trouble came on a Tuesday, which Abigail noted grimly was fitting. Bad news always seemed to come on Tuesdays. Nathaniel had been gone since dawn, checking the northern boundary. Abigail was in the garden, harvesting the last of the vegetables before the hard frost came, when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses, moving fast. She straightened, her hand instinctively going to the knife at her belt. 3 riders came over the rise, not Nathaniel, not anyone she recognized. They reined up at the fence line, and the one in front called out, "Mrs. Walker?" "Who's asking?" She didn't move from the garden, assessing. The men looked rough, clothes worn and dirty, but their horses were good quality. Not drifters, then. Something else. "Name's Jack Morrison. I'm here representing the Cattlemen's Association." He dismounted, the other 2 staying on their horses. "Looking for your husband." "He's checking fence lines. Won't be back until evening." Morrison walked toward her, and Abigail noticed he kept his hand near his gun. A deliberate message. "Maybe you can help me then. There's been accusations made against your husband, cattle theft, fence cutting, trying to expand his territory by running his herd onto neighboring land." Abigail went very still. "That's a lie. Nathaniel's been checking fences because someone else has been cutting them." "That his story?" Morrison's smile was unpleasant. "Or maybe he's been cutting them himself, creating confusion so he can steal cattle and blame it on mystery raiders." "You have proof of these accusations?" "Don't need proof to ask questions. That's why I'm here, to ask questions and see what shakes out." "Then ask your questions and leave." "You're not welcome on this property without my husband present." "Now, Mrs. Walker, that's not very neighborly." Morrison took another step closer. "Especially given your unique situation. Heard you're not even the woman he sent for. Just the sister who got substituted in. Makes a man wonder what else about this arrangement isn't quite legal." One of the other riders laughed, a cruel sound. Abigail felt rage building, cold and controlled. "Get off our land!" "Or what? You'll shoot me?" "I don't think you have the stomach for it." Morrison was close now, too close. "See, the association has been discussing whether Walker even has legitimate claim to this property, given his brother died and there might be questions about inheritance. Add in cattle theft charges, and we might have grounds to seize the ranch until things get sorted out. You're threatening us. I'm explaining reality. He reached out as if to touch her arm, and Abigail moved faster than thought. Her knife was out and pressed against his throat before he could complete the gesture. Touch me and lose the hand, she said quietly. Try to take this ranch and lose more than that. My husband is an honest man who's done nothing wrong, and I will not stand here and listen to lies from men who smell like they've been bought. Morrison's eyes widened. The other two riders reached for their guns, but a voice cut through the tension. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Nathaniel was sitting on his horse at the edge of the clearing, his rifle trained on the mounted riders. Behind him, Ben Henderson and two of his sons sat on their own horses, also armed. Drop the guns, Ben said conversationally. Nice and slow. The riders complied. Morrison stepped back carefully from Abigail's knife, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This isn't over, Walker. Yes, it is. Nathaniel dismounted, keeping his rifle ready. Because Ben here is going to explain to you exactly how stupid you're being. Ben rode forward slightly. Jack Morrison, you're a two-bit hired thug working for someone who wants Walker's land. Don't bother denying it. I've been ranching here 20 years and I know every legitimate association man. You're not one of them. He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Now, I've been watching Walker's operation for months. He's honest, works hard, hasn't stolen a single head of cattle from anyone. These accusations are garbage, and we all know it. You can't prove— I can prove I'll run you off this land if you don't leave on your own, Ben interrupted. And I can prove that if anything happens to the Walkers, I'll know exactly who to blame. Message received? Morrison looked between Ben's cold eyes and Nathaniel's rifle, then at Abigail still holding her knife. Whatever he'd expected to find here, it wasn't unified opposition. Message received, he said tightly, but this isn't done. It is for today. Nathaniel jerked his head toward the horses. Get out. They mounted and rode off, Morrison throwing one last venomous look over his shoulder. When they were out of sight, Abigail's hands started shaking. The knife clattered as she tried to put it back in its sheath. Nathaniel was beside her immediately, pulling her against his chest. You're all right. You're safe. I nearly stabbed him. Her voice came out shaky. I was going to do it. I wasn't bluffing. I know, I saw. He kissed the top of her head. You protected yourself in our home. That's exactly what you should have done. Ben dismounted, his sons following suit. That was well handled, Mrs. Walker. Most women would have screamed or hidden. Most women didn't grow up butchering chickens, Abigail said, her voice steadying. But thank you for coming when you did. Wasn't coincidence. Ben looked at Nathaniel. I've been keeping an eye on your place since we heard about the fence cutting. Saw those three riding in hard and figured they weren't bringing good news. Grabbed my boys and followed. I owe you, Nathaniel said quietly. You don't owe me anything. We're neighbors. That means something out here. Ben glanced toward where Morrison had disappeared. But you do have a problem. Someone wants your land bad enough to hire muscle and make false accusations. You got any idea who? Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Maybe. There's been interest in this property before. The creek runs year-round, which is rare. Makes it valuable. But I didn't think anyone would go this far. Well, they have, and they'll likely try again. Ben scratched his jaw. You need to go to the actual association, file a complaint. Get this on record before Morrison's employer spins the story their way. I'll ride to Cheyenne tomorrow. I'll go with you. More credible with a witness. Ben started toward his horse. Meantime, keep your guns loaded and your wife armed. These people don't play fair. After the Hendersons left, Nathaniel and Abigail went inside. He locked the door, another first, and they sat at the table, neither touching the coffee she'd poured. I'm sorry, Nathaniel said finally. For what? For bringing you into this. For putting you in danger. He stared at his hands. When I saw Morrison that close to you, I thought, I couldn't stand it, Abigail. The idea of anything happening to you. Nothing happened. I can take care of myself. I know you can. You proved that today. He looked up at her. But you shouldn't have to. You should be able to work in your garden without armed men riding up and threatening you. This is frontier life. You said it yourself, the land's hard and so are the people. She reached across and took his hand. I'm not fragile, Nathaniel. I'm not going to break because things get difficult. We face this together, same as we face the storm. Together, he echoed, but there was something haunted in his eyes. The trip to Cheyenne took 2 days, one to get there, one for meetings and paperwork. Ben went with Nathaniel, leaving Abigail at the ranch with one of Ben's sons standing guard. She hated being protected like some delicate thing, but she also wasn't stupid enough to stay alone when someone had already threatened violence. Nathaniel returned looking exhausted but marginally less tense. The association had taken his complaint seriously, especially with Ben's corroboration. Morrison had been revealed as working for a land speculator from back east who'd been quietly trying to buy up creek-adjacent properties. The accusations were being officially dismissed, and the speculator was being warned off. "It's handled," Nathaniel told her that night as they lay in bed. "Or as handled as these things get. The speculator might try again through legal channels, but the criminal accusations are done." "Good." She turned to face him in the darkness. "We're going to be fine, Nathaniel. This ranch, this life, we're strong enough to protect it." "I know. But today reminded me how much I have to lose now." His hand found hers under the blanket. "I could handle losing the ranch. It would hurt, but I'd survive. But losing you? That would break something in me that wouldn't heal." She kissed him then, slow and deep, trying to convey everything she felt. When they broke apart, she whispered against his lips, "You're not losing me. I'm staying right here, being stubborn and difficult and making your life complicated. Promise?" "Promise." But the universe, it seemed, had other tests in mind. The drought started gradually, so slowly they almost didn't notice at first. October came and went with less rain than usual. November was bone dry. By December, the creek was running low and the grass was brittle. Nathaniel started rationing water for the livestock, hauling it from the creek in barrels. "This is bad," he said one morning, staring at the diminished creek. "If we don't get snow this winter, we're in trouble come spring." Winter arrived without snow, just brutal cold and biting wind and endless cloudless skies. The ground froze hard as iron. The cattle grew thin despite supplemental feed, and the creek kept dropping. By January, they were in crisis. The creek was down to a trickle. The well was running dry. Other ranches were in the same situation, but that didn't make it easier. Nathaniel was spending 14-hour days trying to keep the cattle alive, hauling water, breaking ice, rationing feed. Abigail watched him wear himself down to nothing and felt helpless. She managed the house, the chickens, spoons, everything she could control. But she couldn't make it rain. None of them could. It was during one of Ruth Martinez's visits, the women had started checking on each other regularly during the crisis, that Abigail learned just how bad things had become. "3 ranches have already sold out," Ruth said quietly over coffee. "Couldn't handle the drought, couldn't afford to keep going. And there's rumors that the same speculator who tried to run Nathaniel off is buying the properties for pennies on the dollar." "He's vulturing," Abigail said flatly. "That's exactly what he's doing, waiting for people to get desperate enough to sell cheap." Ruth hesitated. "How are you and Nathaniel holding up?" "We're managing, barely." Abigail didn't see the point in lying. "The cattle are suffering, the feed costs are climbing, and if we don't get rain by spring, I don't know what we'll do." "You'll survive. You two are too stubborn to quit." "Stubbornness doesn't make it rain, Ruth." "No, but it keeps you going until it does." The conversation stayed with Abigail, a small anchor in the storm of uncertainty. They were surviving, day by brutal day. The ranch was barely holding together, but it was holding. They were holding. That had to be enough. February arrived with the same cruel clarity as January. Endless blue skies that mocked them with their beauty. Wind that stripped moisture from everything it touched, cold that bit deep but brought no snow. The creek was barely a stream now, and Nathaniel had started talking about selling off part of the herd just to keep the rest alive. They were eating breakfast in near silence, both too tired for conversation, when Abigail felt it. A wave of nausea so sudden and violent she had to push away from the table and run outside. She made it to the edge of the porch before her stomach emptied itself. Nathaniel was beside her immediately, holding her hair back, his hand warm on her shoulder. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" She wiped her mouth with shaking hands, her mind racing. The nausea had been coming and going for a week now, always in the mornings. Her monthly courses were late, very late, and there was a tenderness in her breast that she'd been ignoring, attributing to the rough work and cold weather. "Abigail?" Nathaniel's voice was worried now. "Should I ride for the doctor?" "No." She straightened slowly, testing her stomach. The nausea was already receding. No, I don't think I'm sick. Then what? He stopped, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. Are you? I think so. I'm not certain yet, but the signs are there. She looked at him, trying to gauge his reaction. I know the timing is terrible. With the drought and everything else. He kissed her, cutting off her words. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. Terrible timing or not, this is good news. The best news. A baby, Abigail. We're having a baby. We might be having a baby. I need to be sure first. Then we'll go to town, see the doctor, get you checked properly. He was already moving, planning. Today. We'll go today. Nathaniel, we have too much work. The work can wait. This can't. He cupped her face in his rough hands. After everything we've been through, after every hard thing this land has thrown at us, we get this. Something purely good. I'm not waiting another day to know for certain. They rode to Cheyenne that afternoon, Nathaniel insisting Abigail take the wagon while he rode alongside. Dr. Brennan, the same doctor who'd declared Caroline too delicate for frontier life, examined her with professional efficiency and confirmed what she already knew. About 2 months along, I'd say. Your healthy, strong constitution. He made notes in his ledger. Given your build and fitness level, you should handle the pregnancy well. But frontier life is hard on expecting mothers. You'll need to be careful, especially in the later months. I'll be careful, Abigail promised, though she had no intention of becoming an invalid. Dr. Brennan looked at Nathaniel. Make sure she doesn't overwork. No heavy lifting, no long hours in the cold. And if there's any bleeding or severe pain, you bring her to me immediately. I will. Nathaniel's hand found Abigail's, squeezing tight. They left the doctor's office in a daze. A baby. They were going to have a baby. The timing was absurd. Their ranch was barely surviving. The drought showed no signs of breaking, and they were still dealing with threats from land speculators. But none of that changed the fierce joy Abigail felt, or the wonder in Nathaniel's eyes every time he looked at her. On the ride home, he kept glancing over at her like she might disappear. Stop looking at me like I'm made of glass, she said, not unkindly. I'm pregnant, not dying. I know, He shook his head. Sarah wanted children so badly. She and Thomas tried for years, never happened, and now you and I, we weren't even trying, and his voice caught. It feels like a gift we don't deserve, but got anyway. Maybe we do deserve it. Maybe after all the hard things, we earned something good. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. I'm terrified, Abigail. Of being a father, of something happening to you, of bringing a child into this when we don't even know if we'll have a ranch come summer. I'm terrified too, she admitted, but we'll figure it out. We always do. They told no one at first, keeping the news private like a precious secret. But Abigail's morning sickness became harder to hide, and Mrs. Chen noticed immediately during her next visit. You carrying baby, she announced, not asking. I see signs. You eat ginger, help with sick stomach. How did you know? I have 6 children, 12 grandchildren. I know. Mrs. Chen smiled, rare and genuine. This is good. House needs baby. You and Nate need baby. Even drought cannot stop life from coming. Word spread anyway, the way news always did in small communities. Ruth visited with congratulations and practical advice. Clara Henderson showed up with a box of baby clothes her own children had outgrown, her gruff manner hiding what might have been actual affection. Even Sarah Blackwood stopped by with a hand-carved cradle her late husband had made. Won't be needing it, Sarah said quietly. Glad someone will. The support surprised Abigail. These hard frontier women, who had every reason to be jealous or resentful of a newcomer, instead circled around her with practical kindness. They brought supplies, advice, stories of their own pregnancies and births. They were building a community around her, whether she'd asked for it or not. But not everyone was supportive. Margaret Sullivan made her feelings known at a supply run to town. She cornered Abigail outside the general store, her pretty face twisted with spite. Heard you're expecting. How convenient. Now he really can't send you back, can he? Abigail kept loading supplies into the wagon. I'm not sure what you're implying, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm implying that you trapped him. Came out here as the replacement sister, probably thought you'd better secure your position before he realized his mistake. Margaret's voice dripped venom. Some of us remember that you weren't his first choice. You'll always be the woman he settled for, the substitute he got stuck with. And now you're tying him down with a baby when his ranch is failing." Something snapped inside Abigail. She turned to face Margaret fully, her voice low and controlled. "You're right that I wasn't his first choice. My sister was. But you know what? I'm glad she didn't come. Because she would have wilted here like a hothouse flower, and Nathaniel would have been miserable trying to keep her alive and happy while running a ranch alone." She stepped closer. "I'm not delicate. I'm not refined. I don't need protecting or coddling. I can work beside him, fight beside him, build something real beside him. That's not settling, Mrs. Sullivan. That's partnership. And I'm sorry you're too bitter to see the difference." Margaret's face flushed red. "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm tired of people like you trying to make me feel less than. I came here as a substitute, and I made myself into exactly what was needed, what we both needed." Abigail picked up another crate. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Some of us don't have time to stand around spreading poison." She turned her back on Margaret and continued loading the wagon. Her hands were shaking, but her voice had been steady. It felt like closing a door on something, the last remnants of doubt about her place here, about her worth. When she glanced up, she saw Nathaniel standing in the doorway of the feed store, watching. He'd heard everything. He crossed to her, took the crate from her hands, despite her protest, and loaded it himself. Then he turned to Margaret, who was still standing there, sputtering. "My wife is right. She's exactly what I needed, even when I didn't know it. And anyone who can't see that, who wants to keep spreading lies about her being second choice." He paused, his voice hard as iron. "Those people aren't welcome on our land or in our lives. Clear enough?" Margaret fled. Nathaniel turned back to Abigail, his expression softening. "You didn't need me to defend you." "No, but I liked that you did anyway." She smiled at him. "We make a good team. We really do." The incident marked a shift. Word spread. Abigail had stood up to Margaret Sullivan, and Nathaniel had backed her completely. The remaining gossip dried up. People either accepted them as a real couple or kept their doubts to themselves. It was liberating, that final severing of other people's opinions. But the drought continued, relentless and merciless. By March, they'd sold off 50 head of cattle just to afford feed for the rest. The creek was barely a trickle. Nathaniel had taken to riding out before dawn and coming back long after dark, his face gaunt with exhaustion and stress. Abigail tried to lighten his load however she could, but there was only so much she could do. One night he came home looking utterly defeated. He sat at the table and put his head in his hands. "Ben Henderson got an offer today. The speculator wants his land offered twice what it's worth. Ben's considering it." Abigail's stomach sank. "Will he sell?" "I don't know. He's held out this long, but his wife is sick and the medical bills are adding up. He might not have a choice." Nathaniel looked up at her. "If he sells, we'll be surrounded by the speculator's holdings. It'll be harder to hold out." "Then we hold out anyway." "Abigail, I don't know if we can. We're barely making it as is. Another month of this and we'll be forced to sell too, probably at a loss." His voice cracked. "I promised you a life here, a home, and I'm watching it slip away." She knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "You promised me honesty and partnership. That's what I have. The ranch is just land, Nathaniel, wood and grass and water. What matters is us, you and me and this baby. As long as we're together, we have a home. But if we lose the ranch, then we start over somewhere else. We survive. That's what we do." She pressed his hand to her stomach, where the smallest swell was beginning to show. "This baby is going to be born into a family that doesn't quit, that fights for what matters. We'll teach them that by example." He pulled her up into his lap, holding her carefully, his face buried in her shoulder. She felt him shaking, whether from exhaustion or emotion, she couldn't tell. Maybe both. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I didn't know I could love anyone this much. It terrifies me." "I love you too, and we're going to be fine, I promise." She made promises she wasn't sure she could keep, but sometimes that was all you could do. Hold on, keep fighting, refuse to break. The rain came on a Thursday morning in late March, arriving so suddenly that at first Abigail thought she was imagining it. She was feeding the chickens when the first drops hit her face. She looked up at the sky, barely daring to hope. Clouds. Real clouds. dark and heavy and full of promise. The drops came faster, turning into a steady rainfall. Abigail stood there, face turned up, letting it soak her. She heard Nathaniel shouting from the barn, his voice full of something she hadn't heard in months. Joy. It rained for 2 days straight. Not a violent storm like the one that had nearly killed them, but a steady, soaking rain that replenished the earth. The creek began rising. The grass started greening. The cattle lifted their heads and drank from puddles, their ribs still showing but their eyes brighter. When the rain finally stopped, the world looked different, washed clean, new. Nathaniel walked the fence lines and came back grinning. The creek's running strong again. The grass is already coming back. We might actually make it, Abigail. We might actually survive this. I told you we would. You did. I should have listened. He pulled her close, mindful of her growing belly. We're going to be all right, all three of us. News came the next week that Ben Henderson had turned down the speculator's offer. The rain had changed his calculus, given him hope to hold on. Other ranchers followed suit. The speculator, frustrated by the drought breaking and everyone refusing to sell, finally gave up and left Wyoming altogether. The threat was over. The drought was broken. Spring arrived properly, with green grass and running water and livestock that started putting weight back on. The ranch wasn't out of danger. They'd have lean times recovering from the losses, but they'd survived. Abigail's pregnancy progressed through the summer. Her belly grew round and heavy. She moved slower, tired more easily, but she refused to stop working entirely. Nathaniel had taken over the heavy tasks, but she still managed the garden, the chickens, the household. Ruth and Clara visited regularly, sharing advice and horror stories from their own pregnancies that somehow managed to be both terrifying and reassuring. In late August, labor started. Nathaniel rode for Clara Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the county, while Ruth stayed with Abigail. The labor was long and brutal, hours of pain that made Abigail understand why women sometimes died doing this. But Clara was competent, and Ruth was encouraging. And when Nathaniel was finally allowed back in the room, Abigail was holding a small, perfect baby girl. She's beautiful, he breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. She's wrinkled and red, Abigail said, exhausted but grinning. But she's ours. They named her Sarah, after the sister-in-law who'd made the house a home before Abigail arrived. It felt right, honoring the past while building the future. The first weeks with the newborn were chaos. Sarah cried at all hours, demanded constant feeding, and destroyed any semblance of a schedule. But watching Nathaniel hold his daughter, his rough hands so gentle, his scarred face soft with wonder, it made every sleepless night worth it. One evening, when Sarah was about a month old, after they'd finally gotten her to sleep, Nathaniel and Abigail sat on the porch watching the sunset. The ranch stretched out before them, green and thriving, the cattle healthy, the future secure. I've been thinking about Caroline, Abigail said quietly, about how different things would have been if she'd actually come. Do you regret it? Coming instead of her? Not even a little. But I wonder sometimes if there's a lesson in it all. She leaned against him, tired but content. I spent so long being the second choice, the practical one, the sister people settled for. And I let that define me, let it make me bitter and small. Coming here forced me to choose myself for once, to believe I was worth something beyond being useful. You're worth everything, Nathaniel said simply. I know that now, but I had to prove it to myself first. She looked up at him. You helped with that, by seeing me, really seeing me, when no one else did. By choosing me not because you were stuck with me, but because you actually wanted me. I did choose you, do choose you, every day. He kissed her forehead. Best decision I ever made, accepting that letter of yours. Could have said no, waited for someone else, but something told me you were exactly what I needed. What we both needed, she corrected. You taught me that partnership isn't about being perfect or pretending to be someone you're not. It's about showing up honestly and building something real together. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Inside, Sarah made a small noise, but settled back into sleep. The house was warm behind them, full of life and possibility. I want to bury something, Abigail said suddenly. Nathaniel looked at her, puzzled. What? Caroline's letters. The ones you exchanged with her before everything changed. And maybe some of my old doubts. The parts of me that were still holding on to being second choice. She turned to face him fully. I want to literally bury them, close that chapter completely, and move forward without those shadows. He considered this, then nodded. I have Thomas and Sarah's things in a trunk in the barn. Personal items I couldn't let go of but haven't been able to look at either. Maybe I should bury those too. Not forgetting them, but acknowledging that their story ended and ours is ongoing. They did it the next morning, digging a small hole out by the creek where Sarah was sleeping in a basket nearby. Nathaniel brought the trunk. Clothes, letters, a few treasured items. Abigail brought Caroline's letters and the handkerchief her sister had given her, the one she'd carried as a reminder of her old life. This feels melodramatic, Abigail said as they stood over the hole. Life is melodramatic sometimes. Nathaniel placed the trunk carefully. Nothing wrong with marking moments. Abigail placed the letters and handkerchief on top. I'm not ashamed of where I came from or who I was, but I'm not that person anymore. I'm someone new, someone I actually like. I like her too, Nathaniel said, more than like. They filled the hole together, packing the earth down. It felt final and freeing at once. When they finished, Nathaniel picked up Sarah, who'd woken and was fussing, and the three of them walked back to the house. What do we do now? Abigail asked. Now? We live. He shifted Sarah to one arm and took Abigail's hand with the other. We work the ranch, raise our daughter, maybe have more children if you're willing. We survive bad seasons and celebrate good ones. We build a life that's ours, not anyone else's idea of what it should be. That sounds perfect. It wasn't perfect, of course. Nothing ever was. There would be hard winters and difficult years. There would be arguments and setbacks and moments of doubt. The frontier didn't suddenly become gentle just because they'd found happiness, but they faced it together. Two people who'd started as strangers and become partners, then lovers, then parents. They built something that lasted, not because it was easy, but because they chose to keep building even when it was hard. Years later, when Sarah was old enough to ask, Abigail told her the story. Not the prettified version where everything was romantic and faded, but the truth. About being the substitute, the sister no one wanted. About arriving terrified and uncertain. About earning her place through work and honesty and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. So Aunt Caroline was supposed to marry Papa? Sarah asked, trying to understand. She was, but it wouldn't have worked. Your father needed someone strong, and I needed somewhere I could be strong without apologizing for it. We found each other by accident and chose each other on purpose. That's the best kind of love story, Sarah declared with all the certainty of a child. And maybe she was right. Maybe the best love stories weren't the ones that started with destiny and perfect timing. Maybe they were the ones that started messy and uncertain, built by two imperfect people who decided to stay anyway. Abigail looked out the window at Nathaniel working in the yard. His hair more gray now, but his strength undiminished. Two more children played nearby, a boy and another girl, both with their father's eyes and their mother's determination. The ranch thrived around them, hard-won and deeply loved. She'd come to Wyoming as a replacement, a second choice, a woman with more questions than answers. She'd built a home not despite those origins, but somehow because of them. The very things that had made her feel less than, her practicality, her strength, her refusal to be delicate, had become her greatest assets. In the end, she hadn't just found a place in Wyoming. She'd found herself. And in finding herself, she'd found everything else that mattered. The land rolled on beyond the fence line, vast and hard and beautiful. It had tested her, broken her down, and built her back up stronger. It had given her a partner who saw her worth, children who needed her strength, and a community that respected her honesty. She'd earned this life, every hard-won piece of it, and that made all the difference.